As of March 2023, there are a number of reports, rumors, and even leaks suggesting that the successor to Windows 11 is currently in the works. Since those are not going to be my main focus, I'll just quickly give you the essential bullet points, and then we can switch over to the meat and potatoes of this video. But before we get started, have in mind that this video can be consumed in just audio form, so if you have anything to do, feel free to do it while listening. Also, please consider supporting the channel by subscribing and turning on bell notifications. Thanks. July 2022. Citing insider sources, Windows Central reported that Microsoft is ditching its recently adopted one major update per year policy and going back to the more traditional 3-year release cycle. According to this report, the next major version, codenamed Next Valley, had been in its early preparation and engineering stages as late as last summer and is scheduled for release in 2024. February 2023. Several news outlets reported that a leak regarding Intel's Meteor Lake CPUs listed Windows 12 as a supported operating system. The information had been revealed in the form of a tweet, which has since been deleted, and neither Microsoft nor Intel have yet commented on the situation. Also that month, in an interview for The Verge, Microsoft's head of consumer marketing mentioned something about the role of AI in future versions of Windows, though it remains unclear whether he was referring to future updates to existing versions or a brand new release that would be the equivalent to a Windows 12. Personally, I believe the latter to be the case, but we'll get to that later. And finally, in March 2023, Microsoft had launched a new Canary channel in the Windows Insider program, which, according to this blog post, is going to be the place to preview platform changes that require longer lead time before getting released to customers. And for those of you who like to read between the lines, you're not alone, because many notable news outlets believe this will prove to be the testing ground for features that will eventually find their way into Windows 12. But let's imagine we didn't know any of that. Do we really need any special hints in order to assume that Microsoft will continue producing major releases of its flagship product? Especially after that whole Windows 10 is going to be the last version of Windows situation. So here's the deal. Instead of focusing on the leaks and rumors, I want to talk about why a Windows 12 release would make total sense regardless of all the previously mentioned information. Reason number 1, Windows 11 technically wasn't even supposed to be Windows 11. Now, I know this statement might sound a bit hyperbolic, but it's actually kind of true. I actually have a full separate video explaining the whole genesis of Windows 11, so I'll do my best to give you the short version here. The thing that eventually came to be known as Windows 11 was initially intended to be Windows 10X, a standalone version of Windows 10 that was specifically supposed to target convertible devices like the never-released Surface Neo. As the 2020 pandemic progressed, countries issued lockdowns, more and more people started working from home, and barely anyone traveled. That all had a major impact on the way people around the world use their devices, and given the fact that Windows 10 had a 75% year-over-year increase in usage, Microsoft wasn't really complaining. In order to capitalize on the situation, the company shifted its development strategies to accommodate current user needs and therefore decided to refocus Windows 10X on single-screen devices. However, Microsoft eventually decided to scrap its plans for Windows 10X and incorporate the newly developed technologies into other parts of Windows. Long story short, some of those things ended up in Windows 10 preview builds and/or public updates, and the rest shaped the face of what we now know as Windows 11. It's almost like taping a pair of antlers to a dog's head for Christmas and calling it a reindeer. I mean, sure, it still runs around and looks cute, but let's be honest, it ain't gonna guide no sleighs. Again, I may sound a bit hyperbolic, but you get the point. So even if someone from Microsoft came out and told us that Windows 11 would be the last version of Windows, given the circumstances, it would be completely rational to suspect it's really not. They can't just leave it at this. And then we arrive at reason number 2, which is the simple and inconvenient fact that Windows 11, at least symbolically, is a bad version of Windows. If you've been around the community for long enough, then you've probably heard of Microsoft's notorious cycle of good OS releases that are inevitably followed by bad ones. Now, the question of which specific releases are good and which are bad is often subject to great debates. Heck, even if we just do a Google search for what other people think, we'd quickly learn that different picks often misalign in particular instances, especially when it comes to the 90s era. However, as soon as the discussion surpasses the debacle of Windows Me, sentiments are typically unanimous. XP good, Vista bad, 7 good, 8 bad, 10 good, and 11, well, Look, as always, I'm going to be completely honest. As somebody who's been using and testing it from day one, I simply cannot say that Windows 11 is a bad OS. Doing so, in my opinion, would be a great injustice towards the operating system, and it just wouldn't paint the real picture of reality. At worst, Windows 11 is a rushed release. At best, it's actually pretty decent. Unfortunately, it's just not spectacular enough to avoid the simple fact that it falls in the bad slot of the good-bad release cycle. If nothing, that's just bad for marketing, which is not to be glossed over, especially in a situation where the general user opinion about Windows 11 is already muddy in and of itself. And Microsoft presumably knows that, which is yet another reason why they just can't leave things where they currently stand. Even if, hypothetically, that was the initial plan. But that brings us to reason number 3, which is a rather optimistic expansion of what we've just talked about. You see, historically speaking, bad versions of Windows have often served the purpose of being the starting ground for better, newer iterations, which expanded possibilities and corrected the shortcomings of their predecessors. Windows Vista, for example, was met by heavy criticism because of its many issues, which included high system requirements, user account control annoyances, and compatibility issues, among other things. Windows 7, on the other hand, improved a lot of the things that Vista failed at, so much that it became probably the most beloved version of Windows, with only XP rivaling its critical acclaim. Then we have the flop known as Windows 8, which alienated a lot of its desktop users by aggressively pushing a rather touch-centric user interface. Sure, it brought numerous improvements to the table, but that didn't change the fact that it led to customer satisfaction dipping to the lowest it had been since Vista. But then Windows 10 came along, which also had a lot of touch-friendly features, but ones that did not come at the expense of people who wanted a fairly familiar user experience. In a way, Windows 7 and 10 turned out to be what Vista and 8 were supposed to be, respectively. Now, I'm not saying that Windows 11 is objectively equal to Vista and 8 in terms of quality, however, it is at least comparable in terms of reception. Although that may sound a bit demoralizing, history has obviously taught us that it can also be viewed as a great opportunity for future success. And if the folks over at Microsoft play their cards right, Windows 12 just might turn out to be another bright entry in the cycle. And then there's AI, which is reason number 4, by the way. You've probably noticed by now that this whole OpenAI thing is kind of a big deal. Now, even though Microsoft technically doesn't own the company, they did invest more than $10 billion in it. And they didn't do it out of the kindness of their heart. Microsoft is already incorporating ChatGPT technology into products like Bing, Edge, and even the Windows 11 taskbar, and they're pretty vocal about how they have no intentions of stopping there. Quote, AI is going to reinvent how you do everything on Windows, quite literally. It's going to need an operating system that blurs the line between cloud and edge, and that's what we are doing right now. End quote. That was Chief Product Officer at Microsoft, Panos Panay. On the hardware side of things, chip manufacturers also seem to be laying out the groundwork for an AI-powered future. The recently launched Ryzen 7040 series includes AI-dedicated hardware, and Intel's Meteor Lake architecture is also expected to have similar AI capabilities. Now, the earlier mentioned quote was actually from the launch event of the new Ryzen chips, which affirms that Microsoft is strongly counting on AMD for their AI-related ambitions. Meanwhile, Meteor Lake, although still unreleased, is already being linked with Windows 12 by name. With all that in mind, I think it's completely reasonable to say that we're far beyond reading between the lines. The computing industry is at a turning point, and Microsoft would be out of their minds not to hop on board, especially when they practically own the bandwagon. Windows 12 is coming. Now, I'm not going to go into all the different ways AI could be incorporated into a new version of Windows and how that could improve or maybe even negatively affect the user experience, because that's a topic I want to save for a separate video. But in the meantime, I'm curious about what you think an AI-powered Windows would look like. I know you guys usually have a lot to say about topics like these, so feel free to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Anyway, that would be all for this time. I really do hope you found some value in this video, and if you did, consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay strong.